The 1950s in Great Britain was a beautiful time of hopeful rebuilding. Rationing was coming to an end, and families were finally stepping into showrooms to buy their very first cars. But if you were a motorist back then, your expectations of speed had to be adjusted dramatically. This was an era before modern motorways, a time when country roads were winding, and engines were built for pure economy rather than outright performance. Today on UCtorque, we are taking a nostalgic trip down memory lane to count down 10 of Britain's slowest 1950s cars. These are the machines that kept everyone firmly in the slow lane, proving that you didn't need speed to enjoy the open road. Stay with us until the very end, because our number one spot belongs to a vehicle so unbelievably crazy. It looked like a miniature racing car, but went slower than a basic bicycle. Number 10. Standard Vanguard Phase 1, 2. The heavyweight sluggard. We begin our countdown with a car that was built to project a robust, modern post-war image, but ended up projecting absolute, unadulterated weight. The standard Vanguard Phase 1 and Phase 2 models were styled to look like contemporary American fastbacks, featuring bulbous, heavy steel panels and a commanding presence on the road. Standard intended for this car to be a global export success, building it to survive the roughest terrains of the British Empire. To achieve this, they equipped the Vanguard with a massive, heavy-duty 2.1-liter wetliner engine. Now, this power plant was famously dependable, so indestructible, in fact, that it was later used to power the legendary Ferguson T20 farm tractor. But while a tractor engine is fantastic for pulling a heavy plow through a muddy field, it is a complete disaster for sprinting away from a traffic light. Driving a Vanguard Phase 1 or 2 required immense patience. The car weighed significantly more than its engine could comfortably handle, and the steering column-mounted gear shift felt like stirring a thick pot of porridge. Under acceleration, the heavy Vanguard would groan loudly, slowly building up momentum over several long, painful seconds. Trying to hit 60 miles per hour was a genuine mechanical struggle, and on a steep incline, the car would quickly lose its breath, forcing the driver to drop down the gears while a long queue of frustrated motorists formed behind. It was a solid, unbreakable family saloon, but it started the 1950s with a very sluggish pace. Number 9. Austin A30, the relatable narrow crawler. In 1951, the Austin Motor Company introduced the A30, a tiny, narrow family car designed to compete directly with the Morris Minor. It was Austin's first car to feature a modern, weight-saving monocoque chassis design, and it was marketed as a highly economical choice for working-class families who wanted to abandon their motorcycles and step up to four-wheeled comfort. It was a common sight outside terraced houses all across Great Britain. But to keep the price down and fuel economy up, Austin fitted the A30 with the very first version of the legendary A-Series engine, displacing a miniature 803 cubic centimeters, producing a mere 28 brake horsepower. This tiny engine had to work incredibly hard to move 4 fully grown adults and their luggage. The acceleration of the Austin A30 wasn't measured in seconds, it was measured with a calendar. Merging into flowing traffic required a leap of faith and a massive gap in the road, as the little car would crawl away from the curb with agonizing hesitation. The wheels were tiny, the cabin was narrow, and if you encountered a strong headwind on a coastal road, your top speed would drop instantly. For thousands of mature motorists who grew up in the 50s, the Austin A30 represents a highly relatable, incredibly slow memory of family outings where the journey felt like it would never end. Number 8. Ford Anglia 100E. The best-selling traffic jam, the Ford Anglia 100E, was an absolute commercial triumph for Dagenham. Launched in 1953, it abandoned the outdated, pre-war look of its predecessors in favor of a modern, clean, 3-box styling that looked incredibly smart and sophisticated. It featured a bright, airy cabin, a comfortable ride, and an affordable price tag that made it a default choice for hundreds of thousands of British households. It lined the curbs of every suburb. However, beneath that modern, fashionable bodywork lay a mechanical skeleton that belonged directly in the past. To save development costs, Ford decided to power the Anglia 100E with an ancient 1,172 cubic centimeter side valve engine. This engine design was heavily outdated even by 1950 standards, relying on simple, primitive breathing that restricted its power output to a sluggish 36 horsepower. Worse still, the car was equipped with a 3-speed manual gearbox with incredibly long gaps between the ratios. When shifting from second to third gear, the engine would drop out of its power band completely, leaving the driver stranded with almost zero acceleration. On any modern road, the Anglia 100E was a moving roadblock. It kept everyone firmly behind it in the slow lane, struggling to maintain speed on rolling country hills. It was a stylish, beautifully packaged car that people loved, but it was painfully, undeniably slow. Number 7. Morris Minor 1000, Early Series. The Underpowered Underdog. The Morris Minor is widely celebrated as the definitive icon of classic British motoring, a masterpiece designed by Sir Alec Agassiz that eventually became the first British car to sell over 1 million units. It handled beautifully, looked incredibly charming, and was loved by everyone from local nurses to suburban grandfathers. But if you owned an early 1950s version, your memories of this legendary car are likely filled with a very specific kind of frustration. Before the Minor received the larger, more capable 1,098 cubic centimeters engine in the 1960s, the early 1950s models had to make do with the underpowered 803 cubic centimeters and early 948 cubic centimeters power plants. While the chassis was capable of handling sports car speeds, the early engines simply couldn't deliver. When climbing a steep hill in the British countryside, the early Morris Minor would rapidly run out of steam. Drivers would watch the speedometer needle drop lower and lower, forcing them to shift down into second or even first gear, listening to the engine scream as it crawled up the incline at walking pace. It was a car with a giant heart and a brilliant suspension, but during its early 1950s years, it remained a notoriously underpowered underdog that required drivers to carefully plan their momentum before hitting any kind of hill. Number 6. Hillman Minx, Mark VIII. The Heavyweight Aristocrat. The Hillman Minx Mark VIII was a deeply respectable, upscale family saloon produced by the Roots Group in the mid-1950s. It was designed for families who wanted a touch of premium comfort and traditional styling without paying astronomical prices. It featured elegant chrome brightwork, plush bench seats, and a solid, reassuring build quality that felt significantly more expensive than a basic Ford or Austin. But that heavy, premium construction came with a major performance penalty. The Minx Mark VIII was a heavy machine, and its 1.4-liter overhead valve engine was tuned strictly for smooth, quiet refinement rather than speed. Off the line, the Hillman Minx didn't accelerate. It drifted forward with a gentle, aristocratic crawl. The column-mounted gear change was designed for smooth, leisurely transitions, discouraging any form of spirited driving. If you loaded the car with a family of 4 and a boot full of luggage for a weekend holiday, the acceleration became completely non-existent. It was a car that prioritized dignity, comfort, and steady reliability over everything else, ensuring that its wealthy owners arrived at their destination feeling completely relaxed, albeit significantly later than everyone else. Number 5. Jowett Javelin, the Advanced Technical Tortoise. The Jowett Javelin, built in Yorkshire during the early 1950s, was one of the most technologically advanced and daring British cars of its generation. While most competitors were building conservative, upright saloons, Jowett introduced a sleek, aerodynamic body with an integrated curved windscreen and a highly sophisticated space-frame chassis. It even featured independent front suspension and a unique, water-cooled flat-4 engine sitting way out past the front axle. On paper, the Javelin was a revelation. It won its class at the Monte Carlo Rally and shocked journalists with its brilliant road holding and advanced design. But in the real world, that advanced flat-4 engine proved to be highly temperamental and incredibly fragile. The cooling system was notoriously complex, leading to frequent head gasket failures and overheating issues that completely zapped the engine's power. As the cars aged into the mid-1950s, mechanical wear meant that the flat-4 lost its lively spark, transforming this futuristic aerodynamic marvel into a highly sluggish, temperamental tortoise. Sourcing spare parts for the specialized Yorkshire engine became a nightmare, and many Javelins were driven gently by cautious owners who were terrified of blowing up the complex power plant, turning a rallying pioneer into a slow, delicate survivor. Number 4. Singer 9 Roadster. The illusion of speed. The Singer 9 Roadster was a car that relied entirely on visual deception. Introduced in the post-war years and carrying into the early 1950s, it featured a traditional, gorgeous open-top sports car body, complete with sweeping front wings, a cut-down door profile, and a spare wheel mounted proudly on the rear deck. It looked like a classic British sports car designed to tear up racing circuits and zip through country lanes with wind-in-the-hair excitement. But the moment you stepped on the accelerator, the illusion evaporated instantly. Beneath that sporty, lightweight exterior sat a primitive 972 cubic centimeters overhead cam engine that produced a dismal amount of power. The 4-speed manual gearbox featured agricultural, heavy ratios that made rapid gear changes completely impossible. On the open road, the Singer 9 Roadster was routinely overtaken by basic, boxy family saloons and even loaded commercial delivery vans. It possessed the classic, romantic styling of a pre-war racer, but its real-world performance was so completely underwhelming that it became a running joke among sports car clubs. It was a beautiful machine to look at while parked outside a country pub, but on the moving highway, it was a slow, gentle cruiser that couldn't outrun the most ordinary family traffic. Number 3. Bond Minicar, Early Mark Series, the dangerous micro-hazard. As the 1950s progressed, a unique breed of microcars began to appear on British roads, designed to provide ultra-cheap transportation to a public struggling with the economic aftermath of the war and the Suez fuel crisis. The most famous of these was the early Bond Minicar. Built by Sharp's Commercials in Preston, this tiny, lightweight three-wheeler featured an aluminum body and lacked any form of a traditional chassis, relying on a simple, stressed skin structure. Powering the early Mark series was a tiny, single-cylinder two-stroke motorcycle engine displacing just 122 cubic centimeters or 197 cubic centimeters. This miniature engine was mounted directly over the single front wheel, and the entire assembly turned together when you rotated the steering wheel. The performance was not just slow, it was genuinely terrifying. With minimal horsepower on tap, the Bond Minicar struggled immensely to pull itself away from intersections. Worse still, early models lacked a traditional reverse gear. To go backward, the driver had to turn the steering wheel to full lock, get out of the car, and manually lift or pull the front end around. On the expanding post-war roads, the agonizingly slow Bond Minicar became a genuine safety hazard, struggling to cope with the speed of mainstream traffic and leaving its vulnerable occupants exposed in a tiny, noisy, slow-moving aluminum bubble. Number 2. Trojan 15 horsepower Saloon, the walking pace anachronism. The Trojan 15 horsepower Saloon is a car that completely defied the modern progress of the 1950s. Trojan was a company famous for building rugged, agricultural utility vans, and in the early 1950s, they decided to offer a passenger saloon based strictly on their commercial vehicle underpinnings. The result was a vehicle that looked completely outdated from the moment it was conceived, a tall, boxy, utilitarian anachronism on wheels. The heart of the Trojan was its incredibly unique, primitive engine layout. It utilized a two-stroke, four-cylinder, Pew engine design that operated with a distinctive, slow-chugging noise that sounded more like a stationary industrial water pump than a motor car. The maximum power output was so low, and the gear ratios were so short, that the Trojan maxed out at speeds that were barely above a fast walking pace. Acceleration was non-existent. The car was built with zero regard for comfort, refinement, or speed, designed purely to provide indestructible, low-maintenance transport for rural workers who prioritized longevity over time. It was a vehicle that completely ignored the concept of horsepower and velocity, remaining an incredibly slow, fascinating curiosity that felt decades older than it actually was. Number 1. Berkeley SE328, the miniature racing mirage. We arrive at our number 1 spot, the absolute craziest choice on our list, the Berkeley SE328. Introduced in 1957, the Berkeley looked like an absolute masterpiece of miniature supercar design. Built in Bedfordshire using advanced, lightweight fiberglass monocoque construction, it featured a gorgeous, low-slung, aerodynamic sports car body with elegant curves, a sporty cockpit, and a fierce, purposeful stance. To the untrained eye, it looked like a high-end racing machine designed to dominate the grid at Silverstone. But the mechanical reality behind this beautiful mirage was absolutely hilarious. To save weight and cost, The Berkeley SE328 was powered by a tiny, air-cooled 328 cubic centimeters twin-cylinder two-stroke motorcycle engine sourced from Anzani, producing a miniature 18 horsepower. When you turned the key, the car didn't roar like a sports car. It burst into life with a loud, high-pitched, smoky buzz that sounded exactly like an angry lawnmower. Because the motorcycle engine lacked any low-end torque, the driver had to scream the engine to its absolute limit, thrashing through the gears just to keep up with an ordinary family hatchback. Despite its racing car looks and brilliant, sharp handling around corners, the straight-line speed was so incredibly poor that on any slight incline, the Berkeley would lose momentum rapidly, routinely being overtaken by basic pedal bicycles on local streets. It remains the ultimate craziest slow car of the 1950s, a beautiful, loud, fiberglass mirage that looked like it could fly, but went slower than a casual Sunday walk. The history of these 10 slow coaches serves as a wonderful reminder that the 1950s was a completely different era of motoring, a time when the joy of the open road wasn't measured by how fast you reached your destination, but by the sheer character and determination of the machine carrying you there. Subscribe to Uktork for more unvarnished, nostalgic chapters from our rich automotive past, and let us know in the comments below, did your family ever own one of these slow-moving 1950s legends?